So we're going to do that one more time when you're done picking your nose.
Oh my goodness. You pick your nose, or you can pick your friends, but you shouldn't pick your friend's nose.
But you can. You pin them down.
You don't have to pin them down. You're just like,
I mean, if you catch them off guard, yes.
Okay.
Welcome to A Spirited Life. I'm Mark.
I'm Christine.
And this week we're going to be talking about directing funds towards future expenses and how to decide how to do that.
Our whiskey of the week is a whiskey that we had to decide how we are going to direct our funds. And we'll also be talking about what filled our spirit.
We want to live a spirited life. We're documenting our journey towards financial independence while balancing that with living in the present and enjoying our time in the journey. While we want to work towards financial independence, there's no guarantee for what tomorrow will bring. So we don't want to wait to enjoy our lives because tomorrow isn't promised. We want to share our journey to help keep ourselves intentional and accountable, and we invite you to come along with us as we work towards living a spirited life. Every week we like to pick a whiskey that aligns with the topic that we are talking about for the week. Christine, what do we have for this week?
This week we have Bardstown Bourbon Company Carter Collab. It is a blend of American straight whiskeys finished in Carter Cellars Napa Cabernet barrels. Signed by Mr. Carter himself.
Yeah. And so we've talked about Bardstown a little bit in the past. Really appreciate the degree of transparency that they have. If you look right on the side of the label, they actually tell you the amount of whiskey, where it came from, the age, and then also the mash bill, all that went into these particular whiskeys. So we have 49% of a 17-year Tennessee, 41% of a 12-year Kentucky, and 10% of a 6-year Indiana. And these are looking to be bourbons and also a rye, a 95.5 rye that went into that. So, and then all of that went in and was finished in Carter Cellars wine barrels. And so creating something, I think that this was limited to, less than 2,000 bottles or something like that?
Yes.
Yes.
I believe so. And this is what we got at Bourbon on the Banks.
Yes. I was going to ask you to talk about that for a minute.
Sorry.
That's
Hi,
okay.
jumping the gun here.
Yeah, go right ahead.
So, yeah, we went down to Bourbon on the Banks in Kentucky, and we were tooling around, and then we had to decide. We stopped at Bardstown, and we had to decide between the Carter Collab or Discovery 11.
Yep. And one of the reasons why we had to decide is because it's not always easy for us to get the Discovery series as much as we like them, and we've generally enjoyed the Discovery series. It can be hit or miss as far as which ones we're able to get. And so we had to make a decision in the moment about where to direct our funds because we were trying to make sure that we were adhering to somewhat of a budget. Even though there were lots of things that we could have spent our money on, we knew that we needed to make a decision. And so when we talked through it and we said, well, this is a limited thing. It's only going to be available in Kentucky, so it's not as if we even have a chance to get this back at home. And the amount that we really enjoyed it, we talked through all of those things and eventually made the decision, okay, let's go ahead and let's get this one.
Yeah, I think for me, the mix of, it was only like 2 bottles left when we were there. And then meeting Mr. Carter, being able to go get the bottle and go get Mr. Carter to sign the bottle kind of put it in the lead with me because they both tasted great. It's just kind of that sounds silly, but like once in a lifetime option to have that done.
Let's go ahead and let's get into it and let's see what we got here.
It's very floral.
It does have a bit of floralness to it. So
Is it that you think that's from the wine?
I think it's a little bit from the wine. I think it is also
Tennessee?
from the whiskey that's in there too.
Is it Tennessee that gets the minerality?
Tennessee that gets the minerality, especially if it's the George Dickel. But Tennessee in general, if it has like any of the Tennessee finishing, by running it through like the char and things like that, can get a bit of that minerality. Do get a bit of a little sweetness, and then there's something else. I can't quite put my nose on it.
Pun intended.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, I said that on purpose.
It's like a candy something, but it has like a tang or a spice to it.
Yeah, that's the thing that I can't Like I'm trying to figure out how to describe that.
Oh, I've had it. It's like one of those like hard candies that are probably like in like your grandma's like candy dish.
Okay.
That when it's like a mix. There's a one like there's one that at my grandma and grandpa's house that this is just reminding me of one of those.
Yeah.
Undescript candies that you don't really know what it is.
Yeah, I'm almost getting a little bit of like cordial cherry, and just a little bit of chocolate too.
Oh.
It's underneath the floral notes, and I think that's what I might have been getting is like, it's that syrupy kind of cherry.
And I think that's where I'm getting that hard candy that I don't even know how to tell you what it is because it was just in the dish.
Yep.
But I think that's what I'm getting as the hard candy.
Yeah, I could definitely see that, and it does smell a little bit like Grandma's house. Goes right along with it. It's that whole experience. All right, let's go ahead and let's get into it.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Peppery spice.
Yeah, does have a bit of pepperiness on it.
Ooh, there's that candy. It's that candy right there on the end. The late palate is like a wash of the candy.
Yeah, the influence of the finish definitely is significant on this in a good way. You get notes from the wine finish all throughout the experience on the nose, front, mid, late palate, all the way through.
Mm-hmm. The nose is deceiving in the floralness of it. For my nose, it's very heavy floral, but when I sip it, I don't get any of that on the palate.
I think that's a fair point because now even going back to it, if you take a second sniff,
it's like gone.
Oh, for you, it's gone?
Now I smell like now I get like heavy like. Not well water, but like, so it's not the stinky well water. But it's that well water hard, that hardness of it.
Okay,
is what I'm getting.
So it's funny that you say that because now I went in the opposite direction where I had a little bit of the floral.
You're getting more?
For me, I feel like I've walked into a flower shop when I stick my nose into this now.
Really?
Yeah, it's very prominent.
I'm not getting like.
Yeah, and the other notes are still there, but like just. And you and I talked a little bit about this. For those who don't know, once you've taken a sip of whiskey, it changes. Your olfactory experience changes too because the whiskey actually comes back up your esophagus, and you actually smell it from inside of your throat, in addition to from inside the glass, and it changes the way that you perceive it. And so that's one of the reasons why it's so important when you're sipping whiskey and sampling whiskey. After you've had the first sip and you've had an opportunity to work it through your palate and have that sip, go back and sniff it again. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not getting any of the floral. If I am, it's super faint.
It's funny because of that. It almost comes across closer to a wheat whiskey that has some of those floral notes and things like that.
I could see that.
Like it almost starts bordering in the same neighborhood. I'm not necessarily comparing it directly.
Don't make me call it funeral whiskey.
I was going to say next to what sometimes the notes you get off of Weller 107. In that same vein.
I get a heavy. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I get a heavy pepperiness to it.
Yeah, I get that in the mid palate is the pepperiness. Do you get a little bit of like some of the dark fruits also that you would expect to get with a wine finish? Yeah, especially because this is just taking a look at the side label here. In Cabernet barrels for 14 months. So, and the barrels were separated and rotated throughout the rick house multiple times, yielding a beautiful balance of indulgent dark fruit and French oak spice. So there's some of that spice that you're getting. Yeah.
I get a little, I know a lot of people talk about sometimes wine barrels, you get a dryiness to the whiskey.
Yes.
I'm getting a tad of that. Like it doesn't seem like as dry as like when I drink like a dry red or something.
Right.
But like it's just a hint.
Yeah, now that you mention it, I just noticed that on my tongue is that there is a bit of dryness to the overall experience and a bit of drying in the palate. But I don't think it's off-putting. It's just
it's just something different. Like my mouth isn't watery or anything. It's just like, oh wait, there is a little bit of it's like a pause of a dryness.
Yeah, definitely a bit of the dark fruits.
Ribbon candy,
a little bit of that. That's probably that 10% rye, that Indiana 95.5. Pretty sure that's probably MGP.
What?
Yeah, I know. Shocker, right? But it does give it a little bit of that extra little bit of kick and a little bit of the spiciness there.
Mm-hmm. But it's balanced well with the fruitiness of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree.
I do not regret this purchase.
No, this was a great purchase, and it's something that we've been able to enjoy. We've been able to share with a few other folks and things like that, and it definitely was a good place for us to direct our funds. And to your point, I don't regret our decision about that.
Mm-hmm.
And on that note, let's start talking about how we decide to direct our funds for some of our future expenses. This is certainly not a topic that is going to apply to everybody, and I realize that. I just want to acknowledge, like right off the bat, we are in a very, I would even say, privileged place to be able to have this conversation.
True.
And things like that.
It has taken us also years to get to this place as well.
It has. And so it has been a bit of work, but there's been a little bit of luck along the way that certainly helped with some of that too. In terms of, we have taken steps to make sure that, when do you hit this point? Like, what does it take to get there? And, there's different systems have different ways of talking about this. Let's be clear what it was for us is little to no debt. So we've resolved all of our other debt that we have that was outstanding, other than like monthly revolving debt with the credit cards and things like that we're paying off from month to month, things like that.
Yep.
We also are at the point where we are funding or significantly funding our retirement.
Yes.
And so we feel comfortable with the degree and the amount of money that we have going into our IRAs and 401ks and things like that, that we can start looking to save some additional money and direct it towards future expenses that we know that are going to be coming up in one way, shape, or form. And I think obviously one of the other things that goes along with that is we have our emergency fund funded. We have 3 to 6 months worth of expenses just in case if something were to happen. And so we have all that taken care of.
So basically we're at a point where super minimal debt, easily paid off.
Yep.
And we are in a place that we are setting ourselves up for success in possible retirement in the near future.
Yep.
And our emergency fund, nest egg, whatever, is set in case anything crazy happens, like, a new roof. And now we get to break down how we could choose to do other things.
Right. And one of the big reasons why you would want to do this is so that you're not incurring additional debt, so that you're starting to pay these things.
So you don't put yourself back in the hole that you just dug yourself out of.
Correct. And so if I can plan ahead and invest ahead, essentially, and find a way to direct that money towards some of those things, then I don't have to take out a loan to go do some of that stuff. If I can prepay some of those expenses that I know that are going to be coming later. That's exactly it. And so therefore, I'm not necessarily needing to go get, like if I want to do a home improvement, right? I don't necessarily feel like I maybe need to go get a home equity line of credit or something like that, or a home improvement loan. And so instead, we can start saving that money and have that money readily available for those projects, for those things we want to do. Maybe it's a big vacation. And you need to save up and you're pre-funding your vacation. Maybe it's a home improvement. Maybe you want to put a deck on your house. Maybe it's a new car, right? And being able to fund your car ahead of time rather than having to take out. I mean, I've heard auto loans these days are getting close to double digits in some cases. Like, you don't want to be paying that additional money in the interest rates, for an extended period of time, potentially 60, 72 months, things like that. Like, you're giving that money to somebody else. Why do that if you don't have to? Yeah.
So it's basically taking little steps to help mitigate any major payments in the future when you choose to do something different.
Exactly. And so instead, what you can do is you can have your money working for you in the meantime while you're waiting for that expense to hit and growing, as opposed to borrowing it and then paying somebody else. So you end up on the upside in two ways. One, you're not, as you said, putting yourself back in the hole. But two, you're also, while you're waiting, finding ways to allow your money to work for you. We'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about, what are some of the things to consider in terms of like time horizon, those kinds of things. So, but one of the big things is, okay, so now that you know that you're doing this, like, how do you decide? Is it one thing that you go after? Is it multiple things that you go after? Things like that. From your perspective, we've talked a little bit about this. How are we approaching it in terms of what we're targeting or what we're working on?
So what are we considering?
So
what
this
are,
is
what,
just
is what you're asking.
This is just trying to answer your question. Go ahead, but go ahead. No, go ahead. Finish adding your context.
Are you asking me what we're looking to put our money into?
I'm asking you from a strategy perspective. Are we trying to have our money targeted towards one thing, or are we having our money targeted towards multiple things?
Oh shit! I don't know. I was
okay.
So one thing, like what?
Okay,
I
will talk through that a little bit.
One of us is the brains of the relationship. The other one is the mouth.
I will talk through all of this.
Will
and
you
then
tell
you
me?
can chime in. Yes.
I will tell you.
I will tell you. All right. I will talk through it.
Okay, sorry, because my notes did not hit any of that.
Yeah, you're fine. I realize it was because I started talking about when do you hit this? What do you think is to consider? And then I went back and I said, oh, in between we'll talk about how do you fund it. And I wasn't super clear when I said that. I was probably pretty quiet. That's on me. So when you get to this point, there's a couple different ways that you can approach funding and how you think about funding.
Sorry, you said that with such force. I thought that was like, listen, bitch. I said funding.
Look,
you said that with
bitch.
Did you?
Funding.
I said funding.
Yeah.
Damn it. You said that with such force. I was taken aback.
Okay. I didn't realize that I did.
You
say
should
that.
watch it.
Okay.
It was quite a difference.
Look, bitch. Funding.
I said funding.
My Tennessee's coming out a little bit
Yep,
more
you see
now.
that minerality?
Yeah,
I'm so proud of that word I used.
Mm-hmm. It's really good.
Thank you.
Yeah. So once you hit that point, there's a couple ways to think about this and a couple things you probably want to consider. One of which is okay, how do you want to fund things? Do you want to keep money directed at a single thing? Or do you want to try and approach multiple things at the same time? And then there's also a happy medium in between those. So one thing that you can do is you can just say, okay, I'm going to direct all of my extra money towards one thing in particular and get that thing funded up. You can also say, hey, I'm going to spread the love across multiple things that I know that are future expenses that we have coming up. And then I'm going to spread that out evenly or something along those lines to help fund that. And then you can also do like kind of a mix in between the two. And that is the approach that we take is we actually have several things that we're funding ahead of time, but then we do have additional monies that are going into some items versus other items. So some get funded more than others based on that. So as an example, like we have an account that we put money into for our property taxes. And that just is essentially a fixed amount that gets built up over time. That's a prepaid expense that we have. And I basically treat that like an escrow account. So I'm just putting the money in there. Now, whenever it's time to go and pay our taxes for the property taxes, things like that, I can go and tap into that. I don't have to worry about where that money is coming from. I don't have to worry about looking at my paycheck to fund that. And so that makes it a lot easier to know, hey, just when we get to that point, I just have to move the money over from the one account over to the other account that's a checking account versus a savings account. And then make sure I go and run the transaction on the website. And that's pretty much it. But there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I have a single thing that I am going to go focus on funding first. And for some people that works really well where they know that they're going to do all of their investment into that one thing first and do that prepaid expense first. And then just for them, they can check it off their list. They know that it's done. That money's there. It's waiting. It's potentially growing depending on how they've saved that and how they've invested that. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the things to consider. But there's nothing wrong with that strategy. It's just for us, it's easier to have kind of all of those things getting funded up at the same time. And is there times where maybe we need to, like, because something else is hit maybe before one of the other things is hit and we need to redirect some of the money from one account to another? Sure. And some people do that. Some people basically just go, hey, I'm just going to have a whole bunch of money that I'm going to continue to save up, and I'm going to consider that as a giant emergency fund. That works too, right? That you can do that as well.
It's like an adult piggy bank.
it is like an adult piggy bank. It's just, you know, you're saving up for those rainy days. Sometimes those rainy days are a bit of a deluge. Let's talk about considerations and what are some of the things that we're considering? What are some of the things that are things that we're funding, prepaid expenses that we're looking at, or things that maybe we're not currently doing it yet, but is something that we've talked about, something that is maybe of interest to us. And what are some of those things where we're considering either adding to the stable of things that we want to be thinking about when it comes to prepaid?
So there are a few things that we are considering in how we want to save or put our money away towards. One of them, you know, getting land, getting a trailer, traveling. There's always home improvement, remodeling, which has always been on our list, but it seems to fall to the bottom of our list.
Yeah, I would say that's one of the ones that we usually defer away from. Things like that. There's other things maybe that we end up prioritizing a little bit higher.
Yeah, and those are just like remodels or updates, things like that. It's not anything that's going to affect our house and repairs or anything like that. But it's not the newest and shiniest. But we tend to lean more towards traveling and doing and things of that nature.
So there are a few things, as you mentioned, that we're already directing money towards. Home improvement is definitely one of them, and we have some money that's set aside towards that. But we have not made it a significant enough priority to be able to do maybe some of the larger projects that we've talked about doing, like a bathroom renovation or a kitchen renovation, where that's going to require a much larger amount of investment than what we've been doing up to this point. Travel, we've pretty much always been paying for that kind of as we go, or using the money as we go. So we set money aside for that, but then pretty much as soon as that money's in the travel amount, we're spending that.
We're traveling.
Yeah, if we're traveling, we're using it, which is great. But that also means that it limits maybe some of the things that we would potentially look to do if we wanted to do a bigger trip or a longer trip, or and by bigger, what I mean is like traveling farther, like maybe actually going to Europe or going over to Australia or Hawaii or to Japan. Something along those lines, where it's going to require a much more significant investment than what we typically have readily available. And then, of course, there is also, you know, to balance some of that out, you know, travel is one of those things where it's the opportunity to get away. You talked about a couple of other things that go along with getting away, which is the opportunity to potentially have a trailer, which goes right in line with that. And you know, that would open up some opportunities for us to camp in different places and explore camping and travel in a different way. And then there is also potentially, you know, buying some land and considering being able to create an oasis that we can get away to, and as like a little bit of a respite or things like that. Each one of those things has pros and cons to it. Each one of those things is you know, something where we be making a commitment in one way, shape, or form. And so, you know, one of the things we do need to think about is okay, when we're thinking about what we're considering and some strategies on how to decide where we want to send our money to, there are some aspects to that, like what's the time horizon? And depending on the time horizon, this is one of the big things about how to decide where to put your money, is taking a look at the time horizon. Is this near? Is this far? Right? Is this something that you want to do, something that's closer, or is this something that you want to do that's further away? And yes, I see you're smiling, which means near,
far.
Yes. So, thank you, Sesame Street and Grover. Yeah. So there's a lot of factors that you have to weigh out or consider, like time horizons. And my brain just did what you said your brain does. It just decided to just stop.
Everything goes poof.
Yeah. Well, because I was thinking like this would be a good thing for you to talk about in terms of like some different factors.
Okay, what are different factors? But this is none of the things that my brain thinks about ever.
Okay.
I'm just on the pros and cons list of what I even think about what I might want to start investing money into.
Okay. Well, that's a great place to start in terms of strategies for how to decide. So is just thinking about the pros and cons. And by the way, a lot of people are like you in that they just may not even know how to even go about thinking about this above and beyond that. So we can talk about a few things. Let's talk about pros and cons list first. And that's probably the most significant one that people jump to is they start thinking about the pros and cons for each one of the things that they're potentially going to invest in or the things that they might want to do, right?
Yes.
And so let's talk a little bit about how have you been thinking about that, or how have you been going about approaching that?
So I have broken down kind of the things that we're considering between travel, trailer, land, home improvements. And I broke those kind of down into different lists that I make for pros and cons. So travel will probably be something that I think more of as a semi-near thing. I have a friend moving to France, and then I have another friend who might be going to Spain or something for their milestone birthday. So those kind of have a set, one of them has kind of a set timeline on it, which makes it more in the near category. Another thing we need to take into consideration is what everything really entails realistically. It's one thing to think about, I have land and I'm going to go there and there's going to be this cottage or this log cabin and something, and I'm going to have trails. But we might be the ones that have to do all that on top of like the trailer. Like, yeah, it's great. Have a trailer, hook it up to the car. We go places. It's great. But then there's like insurance and maintenance and storage and all the realistic aspects of things that you need to do that sometimes everyone overlooks because you think about all the great things that are going to happen. You're like, oh no, there's a lot of work behind that we're going to have to do.
Yeah. And I think when you talk about some of those things, finding opportunities where maybe you can test some of this stuff out and find out if you really want to go in that direction helps you understand if you do want to make that commitment, if making this a part of your, effectively part of your lifestyle in the future, because you're going to have that bias towards that. Being able to go investigate that a little bit and dip your toe in gives you a good opportunity to find out if you're willing to do that maintenance, do that additional work that's associated with that being a part of your life. Absolutely. And you may decide after dipping your toe in a little bit,
no, thank you.
Yeah, this is no thanks. And so maybe it comes down to being able to say, hey, you know what? I enjoy that, but I do want I just show up and everything is ready for me. And I'm willing to pay a little bit more for that. Maybe you decide, hey, I don't want to own a trailer, but I'm comfortable with borrowing somebody's trailer and renting a trailer because that's an opportunity.
Yep.
Right. And there is the capability of being able to do that. And so that is one of the ways that you can decide is by dipping your toe in a little bit and considering some of the things that are going to have to go along with it. You can talk to other people who have done that. I know at one point we were talking about, boy, it would be kind of cool to have a boat. And our neighbor just happens to have one. And I asked him and I said, hey, what does it really take to have a boat? And he told me what it cost, and he told me what the maintenance was. And I see that that's where he goes and he spends a majority of his time and his investment.
Yep.
And he's gone all summer because he has that boat. And he also said, unless you really love it, I would not suggest to get one. Right. But if you love it and if you really enjoy it, they're worthwhile, but they take a lot of work. They take a lot of effort. And so that was a really good way to learn. Even just by talking to somebody who's in that space, you may find out really quickly right off the bat, hey, I'm not willing to actually make that investment. I can strike that off the list. Now I don't have to be directing my money towards that. I can be focusing on directing my money towards other things.
A phrase I like to think of is, do I want this or do I just want access to it? Yes.
And so it's like the thing of, do I need a truck or do I need a friend who has a truck? Right. And in some cases, yeah, you actually want to have a truck and because you're going to get the use out of it and the value out of it and things like that. But sometimes it's just, hey, I really just need access to a truck every once in a while. And so therefore, like,
do I need the investment or do I just need to figure out how to get it? I think I was thinking that too when I wanted to live like by the ocean or by the Gulf. Like, do I want this? Oh, wait, then there's salt water and there's all this other stuff. And then, gosh, if you have a hurricane that comes through, you're responsible for all this other stuff. Yeah. So do I want to own that and have that responsibility, or do I just want access to that experience?
Right. And so one of the things you can consider is to say, hey, you know what? As I'm thinking about this, maybe I do just leave my money available for when the opportunity comes up or when I start to feel more strongly about that. And I think that's been a strategy that we've used somewhat in the past too, is to say, hey, you know what, we're not ready to necessarily make a commitment. And that's okay. If that's the case, then you can just take your money and you can invest it. And this is where I'm going to come back to something we were talking about earlier about, hey, what is that time horizon? Depending on what that is, you may put your money in a different place to keep that money working for you. If you are on a shorter time horizon, so looking at the travel with your friend.
For the birthday, yeah. Well,
For the
birthday,
birthday,
yeah, because that's a set.
Right. That's a set time frame. You know that that's going to be coming in what time horizon? 2 years.
Yes.
Okay. So
Not 3.
Not 3. For those of you watching on YouTube,
I have a broken finger.
You can see that Christine has a broken finger, and so therefore she was holding up 3, but she really means 2. Yeah. So because you're in just a couple years window, probably don't want to invest that money into something like the stock market or a brokerage account or something along those lines. There's too much volatility in that amount of the short term that the chances of your money actually being down is not good. Right now, at the time of us talking through this, interest rates are also relatively good with, high yield savings accounts, things like that. They're up around the 5% mark. And so what you can do is you can start socking some money away, and knowing that it's a shorter time horizon, keep it in something that's more stable while still getting somewhat of a return on that.
Okay.
And being able to keep it in a high yield savings fund. So it's growing a little bit for you. Buy an extra maybe a nice dinner while you're over there.
Bottle of wine or
a couple extra drinks at the bar or something along those lines. It's not going to, in a 2-year time horizon, it's not going to create a lot of money, but it may make the difference between maybe going and having a good experience or an extra good experience there. For the purchases that are maybe a little bit farther out, and the rule of thumb that a lot of people use is usually 5 years. So if the thing that you're going to be investing and saving for is further than 5 years out, then it's okay to put that money into a brokerage account or into stocks, something along those lines. Otherwise, you want to keep it a little bit more liquid. And again, it goes back to the volatility of the stock market. So we talked a little bit about some of the strategies about how to decide. We talked about making a pros and cons list. We've talked about getting an opportunity to dip your toe in a little bit, talk with other people who have been in there. We've talked about the time horizon and how that can, help you decide where to put your money and things like that. Is there anything else that we've gone through and that we've done to kind of help decide or help determine where we want to direct our money?
I feel like this is a pop quiz and I'm failing because I can't think of what the answer is.
So I'm going to say one last thing is to talk through it.
I just did the pros and cons list, so I only cared about myself, apparently.
So you did the pros and cons list, but we also talked through the pros and cons as we were out walking.
Oh, that's right. Yep.
Yeah. And so being able to just talk through it with somebody else, whether it's your spouse or your significant other or a family member or something along those lines, even just the act of getting it out of your head and talking through it can help you realize some of the things about the context and where you want to direct that money and what's important to you. As you talk about those things, you can realize where are you spending your time and effort? What are you making an argument for? Right? And so you can start to see where your interest is at. You can start to see what is important to you. And if you find yourself continually coming back to that in those conversations with those individuals, or maybe even if you talk with multiple people, you can find that, that thing that helps guide you towards where you want to be making that investment towards the future.
That makes a lot of sense. And yes, we do that.
Yeah. When you and I go out for some of our day hikes and things like that, this past week, we talked quite a bit about this conversation, and we talked about the things we were considering in terms of, hey, is there travel that we're considering? Is there something that we feel maybe a little bit more strongly about? And I think this is where we can talk about some of the things that we came to in terms of some of the realizations we came to. I think one of the biggest ones for me in that conversation is we hadn't necessarily considered all of the negatives maybe as well as we should have. Like all of the cons. Like
yeah.
as we were talking through stuff,
We're like, oh yeah,
more and more
that
cons.
too.
Yeah, more and more cons started coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh yeah. You know, maybe we should consider this a little bit more.
Yeah. And
what about you?
I think for me, the thing that came up was that I realized that I'm situational based.
Mm-hmm.
So I went from all on, let's go get a trailer. Let's look into getting a trailer. Let's invest in a trailer, and realizing it. Well, I just had a really crappy tent camping experience. So because of that crappy tent camp experience, where not only did we have crazy neighbors, but then apparently I was half awake. I screamed because I don't know if I saw a shadow or something that was throwing me off.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was a rough night for me.
Yeah.
So I went, oh, the easier way to make it would be to give me some 4 walls and a door.
Right.
So I think I'm situational. So then I have that, okay, well now I want a trailer because that camping experience was just not the best for me. But then I go out hiking with the dog, and then I get to places where I could take him off leash, and he just does great. And we walk around. I'm like, oh, I would love some land where we could make a path, and we could just go out on the weekend, and he and I could just go hike around. And I don't have to worry about leash laws or anybody else on the land. And like, this is my place. But then something else happens. I'm like, oh, no. Now I want this because this is kind of what's hitting me. So I'm all like, situational based, whether it's a negative experience or whether it's a positive experience.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what influences what I want in that time frame.
Yeah. And one of the things off of that I remember asking you is, okay, is it that you really just want maybe the safety and security of 4 solid walls around you? If that's the case, then you don't have to buy a trailer. You can just find places that have cabins or Airbnbs or things like that. And you still have 4 solid walls. Mm-hmm. And yes, you may pay a little bit more for the individual stay at each one of those places, but you haven't made the investment for a trailer. And yes, maybe I go and I pay $150 or $200 a night for a cabin, but that gives me those 4 walls without having to make the investment of a trailer that's potentially going to cost me $15,000 to $20,000. Even though the campsites are less expensive and things like that. And so I can buy a lot of nights in a cabin or even potentially in like a hotel that accepts dogs or something along those lines with $15,000 or $20,000.
And I think that was the biggest thing, the breaking down. Because I look at it and go like, oh, we could go tent camping for like some state parks we get like $20 a night?
Yeah, $20 to $30 a night usually, depending.
So I look at that and then I'm like, oh, a cabin is like, I don't know, we're just going to estimate $100. 100 to 200,
100 to 200. I would say probably.
So I look at that, and in my and this is how my brain always runs. Is the short term is $20 is cheaper than $200. $20 is cheaper than $100.
Right.
So I'm like, well, why would I get a cabin? Like I should just go, and I'm like, oh, well, then I should just get a trailer because I could get a site. But I don't break down. I wasn't breaking down the initial cost of buying the trailer. Then the insurance, then the maintenance, then the gas to haul the thing because it's going to cut down on the gas mileage of my vehicle even more.
Yep.
Where in the short term, that even if it's $200 might seem a lot, but when you break it down to what you'd be paying for a trailer over a year, it's like nothing. So I think really just talking that out, also owning the land. Like, okay, all this has to go, and then do we get the land, and then there's taxes, and then whatever else is on top of that, and maintenance and time spent to that. Or do we go somewhere where we could go hike more or do different things? Like, do I need to have my dog off leash, or is he totally cool with a longer leash? Like, he doesn't care. He just wants to get out and sniff.
Yeah. And so it is in all of those considerations, as we've talked through some of these things, that I think that we realize that we're not ready to make a solid decision yet in terms of where we're going to direct that money to. And so ultimately what that means is that we can continue to just save that money in more of like a general fund until we start to feel more strongly about that. And then once we feel more strongly about that, then we still have that money that's been working for us in the background, and being able to say, okay, that money's now available. We feel like we want to move in that particular direction. It's still fungible that way. It's still flexible that way until we feel like we want to move in a particular direction and have that be less flexible for us. So right now, it still gives us flexibility if we keep it liquid in keeping it cash.
Yep.
Until we've made that decision and we do feel strongly about, oh yeah, you know what, we really do want to get some land, or you know what, hey, we've maybe tested out the trailer a couple times and things like that, and now we want to go do that, right? Or maybe we decide, hey, we're just going to work on funding vacations and things like that, and we don't want to get land, we don't want to get a trailer or something along those lines, and so let's just keep the money fungible, and then we're willing to pay a little bit more to have that flexibility of the experience as we find them.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of each episode, we like to take a few minutes to talk about what filled our spirit this week. Christine, what filled your spirit this week?
I got back into a classroom, and it was my first 2 days with my little 17-month-old to 2-year-olds, and I forgot how much I loved hanging out with that age group. Like, just the things and they're talking and the exploring and the fun, and it was nice to get back, and I forgot how much that literally being with young toddlers filled my spirit.
Yeah, there is a certain energy that they bring, I'm sure.
Energy and just goofiness, and just like the world is all exciting, scary, new. Like, you, as an adult, you go through all these things and you've already gone through them a trillion times. So now they're like boring or annoying, or you don't even think about them. And to see like a 17-month, like young toddlers, older infant, young toddlers experience, like everything is like, it's intense. Like, oh my gosh, there's a bug in the classroom. We have like 2 betta fish. Like, oh, that's like the best thing that ever happened. And there's fish in the classroom. Like, all these things that you just take for granted or you don't even think about. It just reminds me just to slow down, and like life is still pretty cool and it's pretty fun. Yeah, so awesome. How about you? What filled your spirit?
Yeah, so I'm a coach in my day job, and we've been coaching some teams at my work, and they just went through and did a large quarterly planning event. As an organization, it was their 3rd time going through it. Several teams, it was their 1st time going through it, and just seeing their growth and seeing how they've been adapting and learning and changing and being able to essentially go, yeah, I've been able to influence that. And seeing how they're really growing into taking the ownership of it and making it their own was really great. It's the thing that we look for from the coaching perspective, is to see that growth and see that desire and building that they're trying to do. And so it makes you feel good when you start to see them take that ownership and you start to see them really flourishing that way. Mm-hmm. So it was great. It was really good. And I really appreciated the opportunities to still interject where I needed to and help guide them and things like that. But for the most part, just hearing them talk about how, yeah, this is clicking and we're starting to get it, like that always feels really good for any coach. So when you get that kind of feedback, you always feel great.
And that's everything we have for this week. What do we have on deck for next?
Next week, we're going to talk about what happens when you hit the doldrums of life. So when things start feeling maybe a little meh or kind of a little bland, what do? We'll talk about that then. And in the meantime, we hope you live a spirited life. The topics and information on A Spirited Life should not be taken as financial advice and should be considered for entertainment purposes only.